photographer. Sir has been a past honorary district wildlife warden for Kolar district, and sir has published nature photos in medical journals. Thank you. Sir, I welcome sir.
At the outset, I thank the organizers of today's CME, CM Ethics in Publication. I thank Professor Kalyani, Dr. Prabhakar, Professor Dr. Prabhakar, and the organizing team of this conference for inviting me and to share some few thoughts about the ICMJE and COPE guidelines. Part of my presentation is already been covered by the previous speakers regarding the authorship, regarding the role of AI, and I'll be speaking mainly, this is more like a guideline, presentation of the guideline, but in between I'll be bringing in some of my experience as an editor over the last 5 years in our journal, that is API Karnataka Journal of Internal Medicine. And the major focus will be on ICMJ guidelines, and partly I will cover COPE guidelines because I'll come to that later. I've been given 1 hour time. I don't like to speak 1 hour. Maybe I will cut down by 45 minutes or so, and maybe we can have some questions. I also congratulate the organizers for organizing this topic today, because COPE is celebrating this week as Publication Ethics Week. Maybe it's coincidental or you have chosen this date for that reason. But anyway, this week is being celebrated as Publication Ethics Week by COPE, Committee of Publication Ethics. And rightly so, you are organizing this event on this day. Why guidelines? I understand that the audience consists of faculty members, part of the editorial team of JCBE, and some postgraduates and research scholars, and even postgraduate students. The focus of my talk would be on these guidelines. Why there should be guidelines for publication? The main reason for establishing any guidelines in publication or guidelines in treatment is to bring about uniformity in certain things. If you want to bring uniformity in treatment, you have treatment guidelines. If you want to have uniformity in publications, you will have publication guidelines. If you look at the journals, medical journals and medical articles, maybe from any journal, they look similar in various aspects. The fundamental theme or the fundamental presentation of articles look similar. You realize this when you see journals, articles from other specialties like social science, law, or history. The journal pattern and the presentation will be much different than what we see in medical articles. So to maintain uniform standard, not just in presentation, but also in the conduct of research, in conduct of, in a way which is very scientific, with ethical principles, and the way of presentation, these guidelines have been formed. And the published article, the published research should be trustworthy. People believe research for various things, like if a research article is published, that is a basis for forming treatment guidelines. That becomes a part of evidence, for evidence-based medicine. So the guidelines, the research published should be trustworthy. And it also should help advance the scientific knowledge, and it should help the editorial team to resolve issues which arises during the publication process. So for these reasons, we have various guidelines. If you look at journal articles, it's a sequence. On the one end of the spectrum, there is an author who has done a research, author or a group of authors who has done research, and they send it to a journal, which is reviewed by editors, reviewers, and after acceptance, it will be the publishers who publish the data, and ultimately it reaches the readers. So everyone has some role in this publication process, and the guideline should cover almost all of these. We have several guidelines for scientific publications in medicine, but the one which is widely accepted, the one which is very authentic, is International Committee of Medical Journal Editors guidelines. And there is another guideline called COPE guidelines, that is Committee of Publication Ethics, which mainly deals with the ethics in publication. And there is guideline from World Medical Association of Medical Editors, and each of them are complementary, not contradictory. You need not be confused that there are so many guidelines. Each one complements the other. When you discuss about COPE guidelines, when you resolve some dispute, they take into consideration the ICMJE criteria. ICMJE, while forming some guidelines, they take ethical guidelines from COPE. So they're complementary. And there are specific guidelines for particular types of articles. Suppose you are conducting a randomized control trial. You have the way how it should be presented. There is a consort guidelines or consort presentation. There is PRISMA for systematic reviews. There is similarly for case reports. What is ICMJE International? As I said, ICMJE is International Council of Medical Journal Editors. It's a small group of working editors, small group of journals. Mostly they meet annually and they draft guidelines so that a uniform format of the journals are maintained across the spectrum of medical science. The membership for this committee is by invitation only. Any journal can adopt the guidelines. Primarily, there are about 14 members in this association, in this committee. They are all by invitation, and any journal can adopt these guidelines and they follow the ICMJ criteria. And the list of journals which adopt these guidelines are published in the website of ICMJE. You can apply by filling out the form and giving the details of your journal so that ICMJE approves and accepts them in their website. These are the members of ICJME. That includes Annals of Internal Medicine, JAMA, NEJM, Nature Medicine, New Zealand Journal of Medicine, Korean Journal of Medicine, PLOS One, Lancet, Deutsches Arztblatt, that's a German journal, Tunisian Medical Journal. So along with that, there are two member associations like World Association of Medical Editors and National Library of Medicine, that is the PubMed. So what is this guideline about? The guideline was first published in 1978 for reasons which I mentioned earlier, to bring uniformity in research and in uniformity in presentation of scientific research. They are previously called as Uniform Requirement for Manuscripts. Uniform require how a manuscript has to be prepared, how a manuscript has to be presented, how it should be published. So initially, when it was first published, it was called as URM, but later there are several issues came up in the publication process. That publication itself became so complicated. So then they started expanding. They started bringing in new guidelines. So a few years later, they combined everything, and now it is called as Recommendations for Conduct, Reporting, Editing, and Publication of Scholarly Work in Medical Journals. This is the screenshot of the journal. It runs into 20 pages, and in 20 pages, every sentence gives some important, some useful information, and every sentence can be a situation for a case or resolving some dispute. So it is essential for everyone who is interested in the handling of the journal manuscripts or in submitting the manuscript. Primarily, these recommendations are intended for people. Primarily, these recommendations are intended for people who publish who want to publish an article in these member journals. Suppose you want to publish to any of those 14 journals which I mentioned, New England Journal of Medicine, JAMA, and so you have to be familiar with these guidelines, because only when you fulfill all those criteria, probably the articles will be taken up for further review. Otherwise, within half an hour, you send it to any of those journals. As sir said, they are all AI-based screening. Within half an hour, you get the reply. Article rejected. Sorry for the inconvenience. So that is how it works. So it is essential, if you want to prepare a manuscript for a high impact journal, it is very essential that any author should go through these guidelines and formulate their research and formulate their manuscript accordingly. The journal, this guidelines has 4 parts. The first part deals with about the guidelines, about the recommendation. The second part deals with the roles and responsibilities of the authors, roles and responsibilities of the reviewers, the editors, publishers, and the owners of the journal. And the third part deals with the publishing and editorial issues related to publication. So many issues come up during publication, how to handle, how to resolve, and what is the ideal recommendation for each situation. That is in the third part. The fourth part was the initial draft of this initial guideline, which was first published, that is manuscript preparation and submission. So how a manuscript has to be prepared and how it should be submitted, that forms the fourth part of this guideline. The purpose, as stated in the guideline, is to review the best practice and ethical standards in the conduct and reporting of research and other material published in medical journal, to help the authors, editors, and others involved in the peer review process of biomedical publishing, create and distribute accurate, clear, reproducible, unbiased medical journal articles, And it also should provide an insight to the general public and to the media how a medical journal is published. As I said earlier, who should use them? Primarily for the authors who submit manuscript to member journals, the 14 member journals. And the non-member journals, any other journals can adopt these guidelines. Currently, there are about 6,000 journals which adopt ICMJE criteria for their publication. And these journals, their author instructions are based on the recommendation of ICMJE. There is no monitoring or enforcement by this council. It is voluntary. You can join the council recommendation and you can voluntarily exit from the council just by writing. Journals include them in the author instruction so that there is a uniformity. The second part deals with the roles and responsibilities of the authors. Role of authors and contributors. Why authorship matters? Madam has already covered this topic. Authorship matters because authorship brings you some sort of credibility. Authorship brings you is important in getting promotion, getting financial benefits in the form of grants, research grants, fellowships, etc. And authors are credited for the published material and take responsibility of the content. Once you get some benefit, it also comes with some responsibility. The responsibility is to authenticate and validate the research which you have submitted and which you have presented, and take full responsibility for the integrity of that research and the content of the research. And author contributions to article. I will not go into the details of who is an author. As already mentioned, there are 4 criteria for an author. He should be the first, he or she should have contributed substantially to the conception and design of the study, should be involved in the data, in getting the data, analyzing the data, and critically writing of the manuscript and critically reviewing it for intellectual content, and final approval of the manuscript by all the authors concerned. Agreement has to be, and finally, the author, one who is to be considered as an author, he should agree to be accountable for all aspects of the research and the manuscript and the publication. Anyone who meets sometimes what happens is, especially from low and middle income countries, they are given the first responsibility. Like, because we have plenty of cases of so many diseases, those countries, the researchers are taken, they are enrolled with the first task, like collecting the data, collecting the patient forms, only conducting the investigation. Further work is done by researchers from developed countries. They don't give credit to the first part, that especially researchers from the low and medium income countries. So ICMG made it mandatory that if someone is involved in the first step, like design and collection of the data, he should be given an opportunity to be of the second and third. You cannot exclude them just because you have written the manuscript, you have analyzed the manuscript, it is your critical thinking. So it makes it mandatory that if they have participated in the first criteria, they should be given an opportunity to participate in the second and third criteria also. And fourth criteria is a must, that whoever has to be an author, he should take full responsibility for the content. So corresponding author is only a primary contact between the journal office and the readers and the group of authors. He takes responsibility for everything, to communicate to the authors, communicate with other authors, as well as the editorial team and with the reviewers. The identifying the authors is not the job of editorial team. Who is the author? What is the sequence of authorship? Who is the first author? Who is the last author? It has to be decided by the author's team. Editors also cannot decide about the authorship conflict. The authorship conflict has to be resolved by the authors or by the author's institution. At their own discretion, they may get involved in some arbitration, but generally, editors don't take the responsibility of resolving authorship dispute. The second part also deals with the AI-assisted technology. I'll skip this as it was dealt exhaustively by the previous speaker. There are particular journals differ in their approach to use of AI. Some journals do not allow AI-generated images, like Springer Nature. They say use of images is strictly prohibited if it is generated by AI. Some journals allow the AI-generated images. Only thing is it has to be disclosed. Any form of use of AI in articles has to be disclosed either in the method section or in the acknowledgement section. And authors have to review the content. The most important part of integrity of research, most important part of maintaining transparency of research is disclosure. The disclosures can be in various other forms, like disclosure may be financial involvement or non-financial relationship. That becomes a conflict of interest. Authors have the primary interest of maintaining the research integrity, public health, and larger cause of public health and the patient welfare, and maintaining the research validity. There is sometimes there are secondary association with a company, association with industry, association with some organization which compete with the primary interest. So if there is any conflict of interest, that has to be fully disclosed. And the financial relationship of author with any industry has to be disclosed. Sometimes there can be non-financial conflicts of interest also. For example, a person may have deep-rooted political ideas, or they can have some personal biases. Even that has to be disclosed according to, you might have seen last few years back, there was an article by Barack Obama in New England Journal of Medicine during his presidential campaign. He wrote an article about how he wants to reform the American healthcare. He also wrote a conflict of interest that my ideas are based on this party's political ideology. So sometimes those also have to be disclosed. Author disclosure forms are prescribed by ICMJE. All member journals should have this format, and it's ideal that all authors fill up the author disclosure forms and submit it to the journal along with the manuscript. Funding is not a conflict of interest. Suppose if a study is funded by an agency or funded by an industry, that is not conflict of interest, but that has to be disclosed, that who are the funders and what is their role in the research. Do the authors and the researchers have full independence? Do they have full availability, access to the data? Or is there any understanding, or is there any contract between the researchers and the funding agency? All these things have to be disclosed, but funding itself is not a conflict of interest. And remember, non-disclosure of conflict of interest is a research misconduct. Suppose at a later time that an article is published by an author, maybe some drug trial or some other thing, it was found out that he had an industry relationship or he had a financial relationship with something, that article can be subjected for a case of research misconduct. So disclosure involves everybody involved in the research process, like the authors, which I already mentioned. The reviewers also have to disclose their conflict of interest. Sometimes an author might submit an article on some drug or some other, and the researcher, the reviewer may also have a conflict of interest. He may approve that. Sometimes there may not be financial conflict. There may be personal relationship. He may be the student, or he may be working in the same institute, or the former employee of that institute from where the article came. Sometimes there may be personal rivalry. There may be competing areas of interest. So if somebody gets, the reviewer gets an idea that this paper is in direct conflict with my research area, he might reject it so that their advance can be stopped. So these things also have to be disclosed. So even reviewers have to disclose. Editors also have to disclose their financial conflicts, as well as there are some non-financial conflict of interest with editors. Personal relationship with the author, knowing the institution of the authors. So there can be some conflict of interest. There is some type of malpractice, misconduct going on, happens. Sometimes the authors make one of the editor as a co-author, a gifted authorship, so that the author, the editor article gets fast-tracked in the journal, has high chance of acceptance and acceptance at early date. That also has to be disclosed. And if the editorial board members are authors of the journal, they have to disclose it. And they have to recuse themselves from deciding on any aspect of the article. So this is essential. That has to be disclosed in the author instruction page. The journal should disclose that if the author is connected some way to the editorial board, that has to be disclosed, and they have to recuse themselves from any decision. Journal owner and journal itself can have some conflict of interest, especially with the industry. So these also needs to be disclosed. Then there are responsibilities. As I said, everyone has a responsibility in publication process. Author assumes full authorship, has a responsibility to fulfill all authorship criteria. What are the authorship criteria? We have already discussed. So he or she should fulfill all authorship criteria. They should disclose all conflict of interest, and they should decide which journal they are submitting. That is the first thing. Sometimes they submit to a journal. 1 month later, they realize that this journal is not indexed in PubMed. They write to the editor, withdraw. I want to withdraw this article. Lot of wastage of resources, energy, reviewer time, very precious. So, and another most important responsibility is avoid predatory journals or pseudo journals. Many a times after this MCI recommendation, young researchers are in pressure, like they have to publish. They have to get their article published as early as possible. The easiest way is to get published in a predatory journal. So without much thinking, they submit to a journal, it gets published, then they realize that this is not useful for their advancement in promotion or whatever. Then they submit to another journal. They are doing two mistakes. One, they have promoted a predatory journal, then they're submitting second time to another journal, which is a duplicate submission. I'll come to that later. So never promote a predatory journal. How to identify a predatory journal? There are several criteria. You can go through that. A predatory journal publishes anything and everything that is sent to them for a fee. The only criteria is you should pay them the required fee, they'll publish. There are journals which advertise that publication within 48 hours. Sometimes even 48 days, we cannot get the peer review. Yeah, it gets extend due date, but journals publish within 48 hours. So if they are publishing too fast, if they are publishing anything and everything, if there is no peer, they may say that it's peer reviewed, but actual peer review never happens. They say it is indexed in something which is not recognized. So all these things are predatory journals. So avoid them. That's a responsibility laid down by ICMJE criteria. So then comes the journal responsibility. Even journal editor, editorial board members have some responsibility. First is maintain confidentiality. It's the original work of somebody else. He is as the sole owner of that data. He's the sole owner of that idea, that manuscript. So maintain confidential. Never disclose that, oh, we have received this article. It's very interesting with someone, maybe in your department or other things. There are, it happens sometimes that till the article is published, the details of the article should never be disclosed to media or anywhere. There are cases, there are sometimes you might know, a few years back, there a controversy happened. Insulin glargine, a largest selling molecule, which was worth about $6 billion in market. An article was submitted. It was about to be published by Diabetologia. Somehow the media got a clue that the article is about a rare side effect of glargine, that is carcinogenesis. The market reacted very sharply. Sanofi Aventis shares fall. Then it came to know that the matter leaked from the journal. The journal had to publish an explanation. They published it much faster than what they intended to be. They wanted to have further scrutiny, but even before scrutiny, they had to publish because it was already in the public domain. So these things are very important, maintaining the confidentiality. A manuscript or reviewer comments are privileged communication. A comment given by the reviewer is meant for the editor and the author, nobody else. You cannot discuss them in public with your colleagues or friends or other authors. Sometimes, as far as journals like ours, which is an association, which is owned by an association, many members ask that I had submitted this to journal. I received this bad reviewer comment. Who is a reviewer? Confidentiality. Give them a smile, move on. Never disclose. Otherwise, you'll be creating a rift between two researchers. So these are the confidentiality which we should always maintain. The reviewers, editors shouldn't appropriate author's work. Sometimes the reviewers get an idea after getting the paper. Oh, this paper is bad, but the idea is good. So they develop that idea. They prepare one more paper, submit it elsewhere. So that's also unethical. Even the editorial team should not appropriate the work of other authors. What the reviewers have to delete the manuscript after the review is over. They cannot keep it perpetually. Whereas the journal has to keep the manuscript for about 3 years or permanently. Timeliness is a part of guideline. Prompt review, very difficult. Prompt review because peer review is a difficult process. As sir said, it's very difficult to get the peer review in time. And sometimes, if you are not interested to publish, reject early. Desk rejection, that is, when the editor sees the journal article, he knows that it is clearly out of scope of our journal. At times it happens. Sometimes ours is a internal medicine journal. One article came that was on acute appendicitis, clearly out of focus. On the part of mistake on the part of editor, he kept it pending. He sent it for peer review. The peer review never happened. 1 year, 2 year never happened. And because the author didn't correspond, the editor also didn't bother. So 2 years later, the author wrote a letter that for 2 years my article is pending. Please give me the decision. Then we had to get it peer reviewed by a surgeon, because at this time I cannot reject saying that it is out of scope. We have kept it for 2 years and now you say the article is out of scope is clearly bad. So we got a review from the surgeon. It was clearly, the paper was rejected on merit, on the basis of the article, not on the basis of out of scope. So these things are very important. Peer review is an important part of any manuscript. Whether peer review, how far it is useful, there is a debate going on this topic, but nevertheless, it's a way an article or research is judged by others in your specialty, in your community. So they are usually experts in that area, but they are not part of generally not part of the editorial team. The journal will have a pool of peer reviewers. Remember, a journal which is a peer-reviewed journal has no obligation to send every article for peer review. Whether to send it for peer review or to decide by the handling editor itself is left to the journal. And the journal is under no obligation to accept the opinion or report of the peer reviewer. You can overrule it is the editor who decides the content of the journal. And the editor decision may be based on several factors. So editor is responsible for the content of the journal. He can even reject it after acceptance. If somebody complains, we had an interesting case. We got 4 papers from an institute, one by one. One paper was accepted. The second paper was in 3 others are in peer review. The reviewer of the second paper said, the senior professor in medicine, she gave the reviewer report, but contacted me and said, see, look, this paper looks good, but I have a serious concern about the data. It was a case of a study on COPD, 1,200 patients in a span of nearly 1 year, less than 1 year. The reviewer said, I have seen I get a vague idea of where this institution from, because there are some areas where they mention about the ethical committee report and other things. The reviewer I has gone there as an examiner. I work in a government hospital, biggest government hospital, but 1,200 COPD cases which fit the study in a participant is difficult to imagine for me, even in my hospital. And I see in the hospital, you just check the authenticity of the data. It's difficult. Journal runs on trust. The trust is that the researcher does it with integrity, and we believe that the data is true. Then I had to cross-check it. I checked on the ResearchGate profile of the author. The ResearchGate profile of the author already lists this journal, this paper, as one of his publications. That was a duplicate publication. Then still I did plagiarism check. Initially, sometimes we don't do plagiarism check at the initial part, because after revision, there can be again plagiarism. So before acceptance, we do authenticate. So that time, it was almost plagiarized content. It escaped plagiarism, but there was similarity with one paper from a bigger institute in the same state. That study was on 3,000 patients, 3,500 patients over a span of 6-7 years. So this author has taken the data, divided it by 3, and all the figures are divided by 3, and it's manipulated. So it is not just duplicate submission, it's data falsification, data fabrication, as well as plagiarism. So we rejected all 4 articles. We wrote to the institution. The reason the author gave was, I have done plenty of work on this field, and I want this is already second publication, because I want many people to see my data, many people to know about this topic. There are other ways to disseminate your paper, not by duplicate or triplicate publication. So these things have to be remembered by the authors as well as the editorial team. The editor and how many reviewers, what type of review, the type of review varies from journal to journal. Some have double blind, some have single blind, some open review, some even post the reviewer comments like BMJ Open. It publishes the reviewer comments on their website. So there are changes from journal to journal, but what is the policy of the journal has to be disclosed in the author instruction page and in the journal website. And apart from this, the journal has other responsibility regarding conduct of maintaining the integrity, and even negative studies have to be published. We cannot just reject negative studies because the study is negative. There is no significant in the findings. Even negatives are important because that shows, that's the data, that this treatment is ineffective. There is no harm in publishing it and saying that it is ineffective. So appeal process has to be available and include diverse authorship. We cannot have authors from only one state, authors from only one institution, authors from only one country. So diverse authorship has to be encouraged. Ensure reviewers to maintain confidentiality. Reviewers also should maintain confidentiality. So the journal owners also have some responsibilities. Journal owner appoints and removes the editor. The editor-in-chief should have full freedom over the journal content, and the editorial board should have diverse editorial board membership. So these are the guidelines. And most important, protection of human participant. We all know that all studies have to be in accordance with research Helsinki Declaration, especially when we conduct on human subjects. It has to be in accordance in Helsinki Declaration. Patient privacy has to be protected. Patients' informed consent has to be taken. That has to be documented. Institutional ethics board approval is mandatory. It is not. It has to be mandatory, and that has to be mentioned in the manuscript. After this, the third part of the guidelines deals with publishing and editorial issues. Several editorial issues come up after publication: corrections, republication, retraction. Despite best effort, despite several layers of security, some mistakes do come in published articles. So whenever a mistake happens, it has to be corrected. If it's a published article, it has to be by publishing an erratum. The erratum has to be by citing the citation of the article, and that has to be linked to, if it's for an online version, it has to be linked to the previous article. And if the article is appended in the online version, the previous version of the article also should be mentioned. Sometimes in search, you get the previous version of the article. So we have to mention that the article has been corrected and the corrected version of this article appears here. So that has to be maintained. That constitutes good editorial practice. If the errors are gross, huge, which are likely to change the conclusion of the study, then there is no way we can issue correction. It has to be retracted. Sometimes the articles may have to be retracted for scientific misconduct. The case which I mentioned, data fabrication, data falsification, suppression of information, conflict of interest suppressed. So that has to be initiated. Proceedings have to be initiated as per COPE guidelines. Publication, if it's going to take time, if the investigation is going to take time, authors do not respond, the institution do not respond, we can always publish a publication of expression of concern, that we have serious concern about the reliability of this study. So till we investigate it further and we take final decision, the readers have to view it cautiously and with concern. So that expression of concern has to be published. Investigation may involve author institution. Sometimes author institution may cooperate, may not cooperate. If misconduct is proven, then the article has to be retracted. And the retractions are authored by the concerned author or the editor-in-chief or even the publisher. So this is how a retraction notice appears. Like you have to publish it both in print version as well as online version, cite the reason for retraction, and then the author of the retraction notice, cite the article, and it has to be backlinked. The PDF of the article has to be marked as retracted. So in the print version, the online version also, it has to be mentioned that this article has been retracted, and the retraction notice link has to be provided. Copyright issue has already been discussed in the previous talk. The journal should specify who owns copyright. Sometimes it's the journal, sometimes it's the author, sometimes it's open access. So the copyright involves all content, not just the article, the figures, the tables, video, audio in the website, all involves copyright. So many journals, especially open access journals, share under Creative Commons license, that is open access. It's open without any charges for anyone. You can redistribute, you can, but there are some criteria. You cannot alter, you cannot You have to always attribute the original author. So copyright waivers can be done in exceptional cases. Then in publication, there are several issues which happen. Duplicate submission. I mentioned sometimes the authors, especially the postgraduates, are in so hurry to get it published, they send it to multiple journals. I have seen a case where the journal, the article was under review in our own journal, and we received the second submission of the same article. It clearly shows that the author is submitting to multiple journals. So duplicate submission is an offense. It wastes the resources. It wastes the time of editorial board members, wastes the time of researchers. And if it gets published, sometimes you don't know. Even the plagiarism check, it escapes. We have published the articles, duplicate publication. We realized it later. That has to be retracted. And also it changes the data. Like the meta-analysis uses the published data. If there are multiple data from the same study, that changes the result of meta-analysis. So sometimes you can submit part of the work to a journal, major work to one journal, and some part you can submit to other journal. In that case, that has to be disclosed, that this work is under consideration by this journal, or this work is published elsewhere, and this is the work which we are submitting to this. That has to be disclosed. And previously published letters, conference papers, press releases do not constitute overlapping publication. It is allowed. If you have published an abstract in a conference, if you have published in a newspaper, or previously published as a letter, now you are publishing it as an original research, they are all allowed. Can publish in preprint servers like medRxiv. That is allowed, provided you'll have to mention in the covering letter that this has already been published here, because preprints are non-peer reviewed journals. There is no peer review. It's only for early dissemination of the knowledge before peer review. They post the links. So that has to be disclosed. But it is not a prohibition. There is no taboo to, it doesn't amount to overlapping publication or duplicate publications. Then there are secondary publications. You have already published in one article, and some other journal feels that it's a good article and it has to, like the author which mentioned that it has to reach so many people, he submitted twice. Instead, if the article is so good, the journal have an authority to publish it again in their journal, provided the original editor, original author, they agree. If both agree, that can be published as a secondary publication. Sometimes the guidelines published by societies, that can be published. Usually they are published as an abridged version because we are publishing a different larger group. So secondary publication should mention the primary publication, where it was first published. Sometimes there are journals published simultaneously. Last year, there was an editorial from the editors of BMJ and Lancet, Richard Horton and Fiona Godley. They published an article, editorial on climate change and health. Simultaneously, it was published in at least some 50-60 journals. So that happens with consent of the original publisher, original editor, as well as the author. So even JIMA, our Indian Journal of Indian Medical Association, they published. Karnataka Medical Journal published. So many journals, the same editorial was published in many journals. The guidelines of American Diabetes Association and European Association of Diabetes, they combine both in diabetology as well as diabetes care simultaneously. So they are accepted part of secondary publication or simultaneous publication. Manuscripts from the same database. Sometimes we got a case, 2 papers from same institution, 50 cases of stroke. It's clearly evident that the same database, same patients of stroke, one was on something, one was another. Should we publish or not publish? It's a difficulty. That there are guidelines. If the objectives, methods, and analysis are different, there is no restriction for publishing from the same database. Sometimes systematic reviews use the same database. So it has to be mentioned. Previous work has to be mentioned. But you cannot have a piecemeal publication. Like you have a study, one part you publish today, one part you publish it later. After some days you publish one more part. That is called as salami slicing. That constitutes research misconduct. So that is not allowed. Large trials have multiple studies predetermined. UK PDS study. They have at least some 70-80 papers. But at the beginning of the study itself, they see these are the analysis we'll do. These are the publications we are expected to do. So each one may be a separate analysis. Each one would be a separate study. So a predetermined, defined a priori, they are accepted. The journals have to maintain correspondence section, letters related to published article. Reader should have an opinion. Reader should express some mistakes, some alternative opinion about the published article. That has to be published. Comments, criticism. Sometimes a relevant topic for discussion can be initiated through correspondence. Online forums are provided like BMJ. They provide online forum for discussion. The fees of the journal has to be very clearly mentioned according to these guidelines, whether the journal charges any publication fees or not. The predatory journals, they do not mention about publication fees anywhere. Once the article is submitted, then you get a letter that the article is accepted, you pay this much, then the article will be published. That is predatory. So the journal has to maintain inform the authors what is the publication fee and how it is to be paid, when it is to be paid. So that has to be very clear. And I'll skip these things. The journal should have policy regarding advertising. Advertising is also permitted. But what are the things you take for publication advertising? Whether do you take it from only from pharma companies or from some unknown, unproven remedial measures? So the journal should avoid taking advertisement from things which are unscientific, unethical, or wrongful knowledge. How to handle the media, like you cannot give information about even a breaking study before that is published in the journal. So all these guidelines, details have been provided in the guidelines. Clinical trials have always has to be registered before start of the trial. Before the first patient is recruited in the trial, that has to be registered. Generally in a public trial registry like clinicaltrials.gov.in or any other public registries, it has to be mentioned. So data sharing is one which is very essential for all journals which follow the ICMJE criteria. It is mandatory for clinical trials. If you are publishing a clinical trial, the data sharing has to be disclosed. What type of data is shared, who has the data, to whom it can be shared, how long it will be stored, where is it available, whether it is available with the author or in a public archive or a public database. That has to be mentioned in the data sharing agreement statement. The last part of the guidelines is manuscript preparation and submission. I think, and because you all know how to submit, there are 4 criteria. Like this is the 4th one. This you follow the IMRAD pattern for original research, review articles and research systematic reviews. It may be slightly different. Case reports follow a different format. Reporting guidelines like consort, clinical trials, trope. So it has to articles once you prepare and before submitting, it should have a title page, author information, disclaimer, source of funding, word count, number of table, disclosures. The abstract is the most important part of the journal article, because most of the articles, most people read only the abstract. Only the abstract is interesting and it is relevant to their area of interest, they go to the full text of the article. Otherwise, the abstract has to be very well written. It has to be structured abstract for original articles and systematic reviews. For review articles, it is narrative reviews. It can be unstructured. Case report, it is unstructured. Abstracts shouldn't differ from the main text. It so happens that during the peer review process, the authors revise the manuscript, but they don't revise the abstract. So abstract is in a different section. Sometimes they don't include it in the main manuscript file. All changes they make in the main manuscript, whereas the abstract is left uncorrected. So it's the duty of the author to cross-check whether the conclusion and the results in the abstract and the main text are similar, or is there any discrepancy. If that is so, that has to be corrected beforehand. Manuscript preparation, you follow the pattern of introduction, methods, results, discussion. They're all like any author, any general instructions, author instructions page you go, they have all the details, how it has to be mentioned. Discussion is very important. Most of the authors discuss like very simple things like male, this age ratio, this study has this, our study concurs with this study, male to female ratio, ours was this much, the other studies this much. That doesn't carry sense unless you have a very important information, like you're doing a hypothyroidism case, well known that it is common in females. Suppose your study found more number of men, or which is significant, the ratio is significantly different from other studies, then you can highlight it. Otherwise, need not compare every aspect of your paper with other paper. See in the context of your research and create a mechanism and find a mechanism to explain that. So that becomes a meaningful discussion, which attracts the reviewers, which attracts the editors to get it accepted. Conclusion should be based on the result. You cannot make an overarching conclusion. You do a study on the utility of, for example, troponin T in early diagnosis of MI. You say that troponin T prevents heart attack, prevents mortality or decreases mortality in MI case. No, that's an assumption. So there is a conclusion should be based on the actual findings of your study. References, how to mention the references. You follow the previously, which was called as Vancouver format. Vancouver format. Now, ICMJ do not endorse any particular format. They say you follow the pattern of National Library of Medicine, that is PubMed. So PubMed citation is the standard citation for most of the ICMJE articles. There are several other, if you go for citation, BibTeX, RIX. So PubMed citation format, that the NLM format is the most accepted one. Prepare the manuscript, number the tables consecutively, cite the table in the text, expand the abbreviations, give the heading for a table for the columns. Any abbreviations you use in the table has to be expanded. Have a checklist, get the permission letter for whomever. If you are reproducing a content, you get the permission. If you are acknowledging someone, also get the permission. You might have known a case happened last year, this year itself. A paper was published on the adverse effects of COVID vaccine. The journal authors acknowledged ICMR, and for the ICMR distanced themselves from the study. They said, we'll sue you because you have not taken any advice from us. We are not at all involved in this research. So without our permission, you have acknowledged that. It gave an impression that ICMR endorsed their study findings. The study finding was that the COVID vaccine had so many disadvantages. So if you are acknowledging someone who is not directly in your team, better to take a written permission and then put them in the acknowledgement. Preview and submit. So this completes the ICMJE guidelines. Only 2 slides about the COPE guidelines. COPE guidelines is mainly concerned with the publication ethics. So that the ethical publication should become normal publication. Currently, what we have is so many unethical practices, gifted authorship, ghost authorship, paper mills, systematic manipulation of review process, systematic malpractices in publication. So COPE is a voluntary organization. Its membership is by the journals which follow COPE guidelines should have robust policies in these areas. Allegation of misconduct. How do you deal that? You should have strong stated policy. Authorship and contributorship. Already discussed. Complaints and appeals. Suppose the author complains, somebody else complains. How do you resolve the data? Conflict of interest policies, data and reproducibility, ethical oversight, intellectual property, journal management, peer review process, post-publication discussion and corrections. So the journal should have a robust policy in all these areas to fulfill COPE guidelines. COPE publishes guidelines, COPE publishes flowcharts, COPE publishes case scenarios. Very interesting. Just visit cope.org. It has flowcharts for various situations where editors come across, authors come across, like how to identify systematic manipulation in malpractice in journal publications, how to investigate a case of alleged misconduct, how to initiate retraction process, how to evaluate plagiarism, how to take action against plagiarism. Some interesting cases. One author died after submission of the manuscript. It was just sent for revision, not it was in the acceptance process. The author died. Should we publish the article or not? If so, how to publish? So these issues which come up during your editorial practice, that can be resolved by many other case scenarios which COPE gives. COPE has a forum for discussion which is exclusively for members. They have e-learning programs which can be viewed by anyone. Some of them are paid. Generally, the membership is by fee. Individuals can become members for some $60 or something. Journals can become member. Publishers can become member. So COPE is the one-point solution for going for any disputes, like any conflicts you come across during your editorial process, any difficult situations, how to initiate. We cannot, just because a person has conducted a research misconduct, we cannot bar him on our own. We cannot retract an article on our own. There are set processes to do. So these are the guidelines which COPE provides. So because of, I just skipped, highlighted this aspect. With this, I conclude my talk, and if there are any questions, we can discuss. Thank you for a patient listener. There are no questions, and I think I'll conclude my talk. Once again, I thank the organizers, Professor Kalyani Madam, Dr. Prabhakar sir, and